History is filled with great empires, kingdoms and nation states. Some last centuries, others decades. Some might go down in a blaze of glory, whilst others slowly fizzle out. And then there are the ones that just kind of stuck around. And those are the ones that I want to talk about. Countries and successor states of countries that at one point in history were a major power but these days just kind of exist. And haven't really done much globally in the last century or so. Or in other words, countries that fell off. Now, a couple of things before I start. I am in no way an authority on any of this. So don't cite this video as a source for your next history presentation. If you want proper history, go watch History Matters, go watch Oversimplified. Anything other than this. But with that out of the way, let's begin. At the end of the Reconquistas, the Iberian Peninsula was divided by multiple Christian kingdoms, those being Portugal, Castile and Aragon, with the Islamic Emirate of Granada in the south. Through the marriage of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the two kingdoms united, forming Spain. This spelled the end for the Emirate of Granada, as it meant it could no longer play the two kingdoms off each other for its own protection. And after a 10-year-long conflict, Granada was conquered by the United Christian Kingdoms, and with it went 700 years of Muslim influence over the Iberian Peninsula. And this left only two kingdoms, Spain and Portugal. In 1949, after both started doing some exploring, Portugal and Spain signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, which split the world into two halves, one belonging to Spain and the other to Portugal. This left Spain able to colonize America mostly to its heart's content. And colonize it did. In 1492 they landed on the island that is now Haiti in the Dominican Republic, and set up the colony of Hispaniola. Next was Mexico in 1519, followed by Peru, Chile and Venezuela. The main incentive behind this conquest was the massive reserves of gold and silver, which made Spain the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the Western Hemisphere. Now, this is a major oversimplification of events, but all you need to know for now is that Spain is numero uno. The Spanish Empire at its height was, to put it bluntly, massive, going from the tip of South America all the way to the modern Canadian border. Besides its lands in South America, the Spanish crown also controlled the lowlands, southern Italy and the Philippine Islands. It was without a doubt the most powerful empire of its era. Except for maybe the Ottomans. But then something happened. People started getting opinions. Fuck! You see, the Spanish monarchy was also known as the Catholic monarchy, and they weren't very happy with other religions. Spain forced the Jewish and Muslim populations to convert to Christianity and expelled those that didn't. When a German guy named Martin Luther started talking shit to the church, it started giving people across Europe ideas. And Spain didn't like those ideas. A couple of hard religious crackdowns later, and the Dutch, under the leadership of a certain William of Orange, promptly told the Spanish to fuck off. This defiance against Spanish rule became known as the Dutch Revolt. The Dutch Revolt is also known as the 80 Years' War, which overlapped with a conflict called the 30 Years' War, which saw Spain fight against the Dutch, French, the German Protestants, Swedes and the English. The latter of which sank the Spanish Armada, which became the biggest military defeat in Spanish history. Good morning, Glenn! Despite performing all these wars, instability in Portugal and Catalonia and the sheer cost of fighting forced the Spanish to relinquish their claim on the Netherlands in 1684. And only 20 years after that, the Portuguese, having been annexed by Spain the previous century, decided to revolt as well. The next major loss for Spain would come in the Spanish War of Succession, whereby Spain was effectively cock-blocked by the other powers of Europe to prevent Spain and France becoming permanent allies, which also forced Spain to give away Belgium to Austria. The biggest loss for Spain, however, came during the Napoleonic Wars. Although being allies with Spain, Napoleon wasn't a big fan of the Spanish royal family. When France and Spain both invaded Portugal, Napoleon, with his army already in Spain, took the opportunity to depose the king and replace him with his brother. This didn't sit well with the Spanish people, so war it was. Whilst never entirely conquered and having its monarchy restored, Spain's control over its American colonies was severely weakened. So much so that by the tail end of the 19th century, all except Cuba declared independence. And at this point in time, all Spain had left were Cuba, the Philippine Islands, a small part of Morocco, and Equatorial Guinea. But the final nail in the Spanish Empire's coffin came in 1898, where after the sinking of the USS Maine, the US declared war on Spain. Despite having the odds stacked against them, the Spanish still decided to fight it out, and honestly, I think that's really cool that they did that. After 8 months of fighting, Spain was defeated with its last major colonial possessions gone, and with it the last remnants of the Great Spanish Empire. Spain set the First World War out as it felt like it had nothing to gain from taking either side of the conflict. Spain fought the Civil War in 1963, which saw a fascist dictator come out on top. Spain set World War II out as well, as Francisco Franco felt like once again Spain had nothing to gain. And after the death of Franco and the democratization of Spain, it became one of those countries that just exist, basically becoming Europe's biggest vacation destination. The ultimate cause of Spain's decline was Protestantism, the expensive wars that came with it, and ultimately not being able to win or get much out of these wars. It's 1815 and Napoleon is defeated. Again, Austria throughout the entirety of the Napoleonic Wars stumbled pretty hard, and despite losing like 5 times against Napoleon, still came out victorious. Austria had the second largest landmass in Europe, had a population of 50 million and was one of the great powers of Europe. But only a century later and Austria had lost a lot of prestige and influence. So much so that during the First World War, Austria's empire completely collapsed. One of the major reasons for its decline was its instability. Austria was a multi-ethnic empire filled with different peoples and cultures. Where a country like Denmark would be populated with, well, Danes, Austria was populated with Germans, Hungarians, Romanians, Italians, Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, Poles, Ukrainians, Slovaks and Slovenians. And all these different groups really didn't have much to unite them. And when the idea of nationalism started to gain traction, it turns out that a lot of those peoples inside Austria wanted out. In the 1840s, it saw numerous revolts across the empire, with the biggest one being the Hungarian uprising. And all these revolts made it much more difficult for Austria to keep up with the rest of Europe. Which brings us to the next reason, military incompetence. Austria fought 3 separate wars against Sardinia, later Italy, winning the first but losing the last 2. Not only losing most of its influence on the Italian peninsula, but also letting a European power establish itself right on its doorstep. After this, Austria also lost the war against Prussia, which robbed Austria of its title of leader of the German states. This loss was actually so bad that the Austrians feared another Hungarian uprising, and in exchange for their loyalty to the emperor, the Hungarians got more autonomy, turning the Austrian Empire into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And although it increased the stability of the empire, it caused another problem. The European powers at the time were busy centralizing, which improved industrial output, economic planning and military coordination, and Austria just did the exact opposite. And the thing was, Austria and Hungary didn't have a lot of shared goals. And because Hungary was now equal to Austria, it meant that Austria could no longer enforce any possible reforms on Hungary. And reforming was something that the heir to the Austrian throne really wanted to do. And all these factors meant that Austria was completely ill-equipped to fight World War I. And after 4 years of fighting, Austria-Hungary collapsed. And with it, any notion of Austria being a great power. After the war, it had its own fascist dictatorship. It was infamously annexed by Germany, and after World War II, like Germany, it was also divided. And after being re-established, Austria just became one of those countries that just exists. In 1299, Sultan Osman I established the Ottoman Empire in the heart of what is now Anatolia. The Ottoman Empire in the span of 250 years went from a small kingdom in Anatolia to an empire stretching 3 continents. In these 200 years or so, the Ottomans conquered a significant part of southeastern Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And the reason for all this success was very simple. It had a strong professional army. Whereas most of its rivals at the time just went to farmer Frank, shoved a rifle in his hands and threw him into the battlefield, the Ottomans had an elite fighting force known as the Janissaries, who were slaves from the Balkans who were trained and raised entirely for the purpose of fighting. Meaning the Janissaries had a lot more combat experience than the conscripts of its rivals. Combined with the Ottomans' effective use of gunpowder and the disorganization of its rivals, it meant that Ottoman expansion was surprisingly easy. Until it wasn't. The thing with European geopolitics is that most of the countries in Europe operate under the balance of power. That if any one country got too powerful, the rest would team up to defeat them. And as it turns out, the Ottomans were that powerful. Now, coalitions against the Ottoman Empire were nothing new at the time, but the difference was that this time the opposition was much more coordinated and much more modernized than it was before, stopping and even reversing Ottoman expansion. And with each loss, the Ottomans got weaker and their opponents only stronger, gradually chipping away at the Ottoman Empire, slowly falling behind the rest of Europe. And due to the corruption and lack of authority that the Sultan had, modernization was slow and often resulted in eternal unrest. And by the time the dust had settled, a new problem arose. Nationalism. Again. The Ottoman Empire, by nature of its size, encompassed a lot of different peoples and cultures. And although there were reforms on the way, it wasn't enough to stop the Greeks, Serbians, Bulgarians and Romanians from revolting, with the aid of the Russian Empire. And all the while the Ottomans were trying to crack down on these revolts, the great European powers decided to take advantage of the situation by prying away Ottoman possessions. France took Morocco and Tunisia, Britain took Egypt, Italy took Libya and a handful of islands, and Austria-Hungary took Bosnia and Herzegovina. And after 80 years of war, the Ottoman Empire went from this to this. And in a last-ditch effort to save the empire, the Ottomans decided to throw their luck in with the Central Powers. And we all know what happens next. Gallipoli, Arab Revolt, something Lawrence of Arabia, and the Treaty of Sevres. And you think after losing so many wars the Turks would just lay down and accept defeat, but surprisingly, no. The Turks, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal, promptly told the occupying forces to fuck off. And despite the odds being stacked against them, managed to come out victorious, bringing an end to the Ottoman Empire and establishing the Turkish Republic. So, in conclusion, what did we learn? No, seriously, after 2 months and 3 missed deadlines, I really wanted to ask that. Long story short, empires don't last forever. No matter how old, be it foreign or internal affairs, it all comes to an end eventually. I'd also want to reiterate that this video is a pretty big oversimplification from what actually happened. And there are way more in-depth videos for those that want to learn more. And feel free to correct me in the comments. But with all of that said, this has been Martin, and I hope to see you another time.
To be or not to be?